All right then, I'm Harry Lorayne, and I'll make sure you remember me and my name by teaching you, showing you how to remember anything you want to remember quickly, easily, and how to retain it for as long as you want to retain it. I'll show you how to remember anything you see, read, or hear the very first time you see, read, or hear it. Listen, our thoughts are so fleeting, no device for trapping them should be overlooked. I will give you devices to trap those fleeting thoughts, and when you can do that, you'll have a trained memory. I want you to know that this takes a certain amount of courage on my part, because a wise man once said that if you make people think they're thinking, they will love you. But if you really make them think, they'll hate you. Well, I'm going to make you think, but I don't want you to hate me or even dislike me a little bit. So let me qualify. I'll make you think as you never have before, but without pain, without even realizing that you're thinking. And you'll enjoy it. You'll have fun while you're doing it. I want to take you out of that thinking rut in which most of us go through life. I'll show you a different, more effective, more efficient way to think. An imaginative, creative thinking method. Most people simply don't think. George Bernard Shaw said, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm considered a genius because I think once a month. If you listen to these tapes in sequence, starting with side 1 of tape 1, and do what I tell you to do with your mind, of course, you will not only be on your way to an exceptional memory, you will have an exceptional memory. You will be able to trap those fleeting thoughts, and you won't have to practice for 6 months or 3 months in order to obtain that file cabinet memory. On this first tape, I want to give you a chance to get acquainted with me, get used to my way of speaking. You may find that I speak more quickly than most. That's because I have so much to say and so little time to say it. But that I'm easier to understand than most. I'm pretty definite, clear, concise, and succinct when it comes to teaching my own memory systems. You may not hear a mellow, lovely announcer's voice, but you also will not hear any long, confusing words. You'll hear someone who knows his subject inside out and better than anyone else in the world. Yeah, modesty is becoming a drag. Believe me, I won't leave you dangling. You'll understand every word, every thought, every stimulating and fascinating concept, I guarantee it. And anyway, you have control. If I say something you don't understand, if I say it too quickly, stop the tape and rewind it. I'll say it again for you. I want to talk to you about the Memory Power Programmed Learning book that you received along with these tapes. I want you to use that book to its best advantage. Programmed learning is one of the easiest ways to learn because you'll get actively involved instead of passively reading as you do with a normal, in quote, unquote book. It's mostly in frame form, mostly. I do segue into prose occasionally, particularly toward the end of the book. And be sure to get to the end because that's where all the applications are. The real good stuff is toward the end of the book. What it is, it's based on the reward principle. When you answer correctly, that's your reward. It gives you the incentive to continue, and that's very important. You can't and won't learn anything if you stop. Well then, it's important that you answer the questions correctly, and that's my job. If you read with attention, I'll make sure that you get every answer right, and you'll know it right away, because you have the autoproctor mask, which is really just a strip of cardboard to cover the answers. Place it vertically over the last column of a page. That is on the right side of the page over the answer boxes so that you can't see those answers. Then write in your answer to the question. Move the mask down 1 box and see if you're correct. You will be. And as you keep answering correctly, you learn without pain. And I'll enforce your learning with these tapes, and or the book will enforce your learning of the tapes. That's up to you. Right now, I have a suggestion to make. I think you should take the test. The very first thing in the programmed learning book, within the foreword itself, are tests. I test your memory. I want you to see how bad your memory shouldn't be. I would suggest you take those tests because I want you to see your progress. At least take the very first test because I'm going to teach you that particular thing in just a few moments. Why don't you stop the tape now and take that test? Have you done that? Well, if you haven't, that's up to you. I have made the suggestion. You do it any way you like. Let me talk now about what does memory consist of. Really, what does it consist of? You know, there are only two kinds of memory. There is trained memory and there is untrained memory. I have a trained memory. You don't as yet. When I'm through with you, when you've listened to all these tapes, when you've read the Programmed Learning Memory Power book, you will have a trained memory. Now, all memory, whether it is trained or untrained, consists of only two things. That is observation and association. Now, I don't want to take too much time with observation. I will tell you that there is a section in the Programmed Learning book on observation, how to train it, what it's all about. I think you should read that. But right now, let me take at least a moment to tell you that there is a difference between seeing and observing. We see with our eyes, but we observe with our minds. There is a difference. Most of us do not observe too well, and how in the world can you remember if you don't observe? I mean observe by either seeing, hearing, feeling, any one of your senses. Let me try to prove something to you. We'll take just a moment for this. A little test. It has to do with traffic lights, the traffic stanchions that are on almost every corner in every big city. And if you're driving, incidentally, no fair. I don't think you should take this test, but listen to it. Answer this question. You have seen the traffic lights or traffic stanchions, whether you drive or not, thousands of times during your lifetime. Here's the question. Which light is on top? Is it the red light or is it the green light? Think about that for a moment and answer it in your own mind. If you've answered the question, don't run to your window to check it out yet. First of all, do you think it was green? If you were the group, raise your hand. Let everybody see your answer. Do you think green is on top? Do you think red is on top? How many are honestly not sure? Let me put you into this situation. You're going to bet $100 million on the outcome of your answer, on the outcome of this question. Getting that in your mind, would you bet on your answer? Would you bet $100 million that red is the top light? Would you bet $100 million that green is the top light? Or, and be honest now, if you had the option, would you rather not bet? I have the feeling that most people listening to me right now would opt for that latter choice. You would rather not bet because nobody's really too sure. Now, I don't want to make this a cliffhanger. You don't have to run to your window to look out and see which color is on top. If you said red, you are correct. Red is always on top, green is on bottom. If there is a yellow light, that's always in the middle. If you answered that correctly, or even if you didn't, answer this one. Don't look at your wristwatch. Do not look at your wristwatch. You're on the honor system. And answer this question in your own mind because this is an individual thing. Is the number 6 on your watch dial the Roman number 6 or is it the Arabic number 6? That is the number we use now. Answer that question in your own mind, and when you've answered it, take a look at your wristwatch. If you're driving, please look quickly and carefully. Were you right? Or were you, as is often the case, wrong? Did you see that your watch dial does not have a number 6? Or did you just look at your wrist and say, oh my gosh, I forgot my watch this morning? That does happen to many people. In any case, if you answered both of these questions correctly, here's one more for you. Don't look at your wristwatch. Do not look at your wristwatch because you just did. And answer this. What is the exact time on your watch? I think I just caught you, didn't I? And don't feel badly if I did because, quite honestly, during my personal and private teaching seminars, I would keep asking these kind of tricky questions until I caught everybody. There's no way you're going to answer them all. Take my word for it. So I just wanted to show you that your observation can use a little bit of improving. You know, there is a little bit of serendipity that goes along with my memory systems. Serendipity meaning to find something good without any extra effort. As you start to apply the memory systems, you'll find that you will obtain or acquire a much keener sense of imagination, a much stronger sense of concentration, and a much stronger sense of observation, which is what I was just talking about. Also, a greater sense of confidence. You know, all those wheels, I call them wheels, that we had when we were children, that spun so rapidly. I'm talking about those wheels I just mentioned: imagination, concentration, observation, memory, curiosity, enthusiasm, confidence. All those wheels spun so rapidly, but then society tends to slow them down, stop them completely sometimes. I like to believe that as you start to use my memory systems, those wheels will start to spin, all of them will start to spin, perhaps slowly at first, but faster and faster and faster as you use my systems, until they're spinning almost as quickly as they were when we were children. Okay, as I said, I don't want to take too much time with observation. I suggest you read that section or answer the questions in that section in the Programmed Learning Memory Power course. Let's get to association. There's a word that people have heard all their lives, but nobody has ever made it concrete for you. There's really no Twilight Zone-y, ephemeral aspect to that word. All it means, so far as memory is concerned, is connection. That's all. It means connecting one thing to another, and I will show you how to use that. But first, let me give you a little rule about memory. The rule is this: in order to remember any new thing, it must be associated to something we already know or remember. That's it. Now I'm going to say it to you once more, but I will add 4 words, a 4-word phrase. Listen. In order to remember any new thing, it must be associated in some ridiculous way to something we already know or remember. The phrase I added is "in some ridiculous way." That is my contribution to the art, and quite honestly, that's what makes it work. That's what makes it workable. Without that, it wouldn't work. Let me show you something. If you've taken that first test in the Test Your Memory section in the Memory Power Programmed Learning book, I'm about to teach you how to pass that test with flying colors. If you haven't done it yet, you might want to stop the tape and do it now. I purposely paused for a moment to let you stop tape and come back. If you've taken the test, fine. You will see your progress in a moment. If not, that's okay. Work along with me. We will apply the rule I just gave you in a moment, but right now, I'm going to ask you to remember, memorize, learn 6 or 7 or 8, as many as I feel we have time for, items that I will call out in anything I think of, okay? Anything I see around the room or think of. When I'm doing a private seminar, I have the people in the room, I have my students call the items. I don't want you to think that I'm selecting specific items that are particularly easy to remember. There is no such thing. Believe me, I'm just making these up. They can be any items, okay? Right now, the first thing I want you to do is to visualize an airplane. Just see an airplane in your mind. Now, that's easy. You can visualize an airplane. See it in your mind's eye for a moment. We're going to make an assumption here. We will assume that the thing you already know or remember is airplane. Whether you think you know it or not, we will assume you do. Now, the next item you want to remember is a tree that grows in the forest, the woody plant, okay? We will make another assumption here. We will assume that tree is the new thing you want to remember. Now we have the 2 things we need in order to apply the rule. Listen to that rule again. In order to remember any new thing, we must associate it to something we already know in some ridiculous way. Okay, the thing we already know, we are assuming, is airplane. The thing that you want to remember or know, the new thing, is tree. Therefore, we must apply the rule. You have to associate those 2 things, airplane and tree. Now, I don't want you to see yourself looking at a tree from inside an airplane. You can do that. That's logical. And you will not remember it. It won't work. I don't want a logical picture. I don't want you to see an airplane parked near a tree. That's too logical. It's possible. Do not use that. I want a silly, ridiculous, impossible, or crazy, illogical picture. For example, you might see a million airplanes growing on a tree. You might see a gigantic tree flying in the air instead of an airplane. You might see a tree flying an airplane. Either one of those is good. Now look, all you need is one of those pictures. Select one, or one you thought of yourself, so long as it's a silly, impossible picture. And most important, and I will keep repeating this ad boredom because it is so important, see it in your mind's eye. See that picture. See it now. That's the picture between airplane and tree. I paused for a moment to give you a moment to see that picture in your mind's eye, and you can close your eyes if you want to, if that helps you visualize that silly picture. Open them again, of course. I don't want you to fall asleep. Okay, if you have seen that picture in your mind's eye, stop trying, and the next item is envelope. An envelope, the kind of thing you put a piece of stationery in order to mail. We will assume at the moment that the thing we already know is tree. The new thing is envelope. Don't try to think about airplane right now. In quotes, forget about it, okay? Right now, tree is the thing we know. Envelope is the thing we want to know or want to remember. Do the same thing. Make a silly picture or form a silly picture in your mind between or with those two items, tree and envelope. For example, 1,000,000 envelopes are growing on a tree. A gigantic envelope is growing in your garden instead of a tree. See yourself watering it, and it's growing and growing limbs and leaves. It's a big envelope. That's impossible. That's silly. That's just what I want. You might see yourself sealing a tree in an envelope. You're licking the envelope and sealing it. You might see a gigantic tree sealing a gigantic envelope. Any one of those is silly. I could write a pamphlet. I could write a book on all the different silly ways to see a silly picture between two items. All you need is one. Select one of those silly pictures or one you thought of yourself, and most important, see it in your mind's eye. Do that now. That's tree to envelope. I'll shut my mouth for a moment so you can do that. Good. If I'm going too fast for you, incidentally, you know, as I said before, you have control. You can stop tape whenever you like. But the instant or the speed in which you see the picture in your mind's eye is really unimportant. It's immaterial. I'll tell you what's material. That is the clarity to see that, but you have to see it clearly. That's all. And that could be an instant. That could be a split second, okay? All right, if you've seen that picture between tree and envelope, stop trying, and let's go to the next item, which is earring. An earring which you wear on your earlobe. The thing we already know is envelope. The thing we want to remember is earring. Make or form a silly picture between those two items. You might see yourself wearing gigantic envelopes on your earlobes instead of earrings. You might see yourself sealing 1,000,000 earrings in an envelope. You might see a gigantic envelope wearing earrings. Any one of those is a good, silly, illogical, impossible picture. Select one or one you thought of yourself, and most important, see it in your mind's eye. If you've seen that picture between envelope and earring, let's go to the next item, which is typewriter. You want earring to remind you of typewriter. Therefore, form a silly association or connection between those two items. You might see yourself use the same concept. You're wearing typewriters on your ears instead of earrings. You can feel the pain. You can feel those typewriters pulling your earlobes down. You can see a gigantic earring typing. You can see a large typewriter wearing earrings. Any one of those is good. Select one. See the picture. That's the most important thing. That's earring to typewriter. See the silly picture. I'll shut my mouth for a moment. Okay, I've lost count. I want to go a little faster, but help me out on this. If I said airplane to you, what would that make you think of? If you're alone, shout it out. Nobody will hear, so it doesn't matter. If you're with a group, I want everybody to hear you shouting it. What does airplane make you think of? Shout it out. Tree. That's absolutely correct. If you're thinking of tree, if you visualize tree, what does that make you think of? Shout it out. Envelope. Absolutely correct. Think of envelope. What does that make you think of? Shout it out. Earring. Good. Think of earring. What does that make you think of? Typewriter, of course. That's 5. Let's take a few more. The next thing I want you to remember is sing. That's S-I-N-G. Sing, as in opera or pop music, to sing. You want typewriter to remind you of that. Simple, isn't it? By now, these pictures should be coming to you, but the illogical picture should come to your mind before the logical one does. And with typewriter and sing, how could you go wrong? Visualize a gigantic typewriter singing. It's singing opera. See that picture. You might see a million typewriters in the audience listening to somebody sing. But I personally would visualize a typewriter singing. See that picture. If you have, let's go to the next one. The next thing you want to remember is baseball. Baseball, as in the favorite pastime. Okay, you want sing to remind you of baseball. Well, you can see a baseball game being played and all the players are singing at the top of their voices. You can do that. You can see a gigantic baseball singing. You can see one ball player hitting a ball and he is singing because he hit a home run. Up to you. Make it as silly as you can. See, sing, and see baseball together in a silly way. See that picture. That's the most important thing. Let's take one more. The thing you already know is baseball. The thing you want to remember is, salami. A salami. You know, the delicatessen cold cut. You want baseball to remind you of salami. Make a silly picture. Now, this is the last one I'll use in this example. Please don't think you'll know it because it's the last one without making an association. I assure you, you won't. Make a silly picture between baseball and salami. You might see yourself using a salami instead of a baseball bat. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. You can see it splattering all over the place when you hit the baseball. You might see a lot of salamis playing baseball. Select one of those pictures or one you thought of yourself, and most important, see that picture. Please see this last picture. That's baseball to salami. Do it now. I'll be quiet for a moment. If you've seen that picture, if you've seen all the pictures, get ready to amaze yourself. I've just called out, I think, 8. I frankly haven't counted them. I think I've called out 8 items. The one you may have a problem with is the first one. If you do, I'll tell it to you and I'll help you out. And later on, I'll give you a definite way to do it. But right now, you know, if you start at any item and go backward, you'll reach the first item. But don't take the time for that now. I will tell you, if you haven't already thought of it, that the first item is airplane. Now, think of airplane and tell me, what does that make you think of? What silly thing was flying an airplane, or what was flying instead of an airplane? I'm talking only to give you time to think of it or shout it out. And of course, you just did. It's tree. You're absolutely right. Airplane reminds you of tree. Think of tree for a moment. What does that remind you of? Millions of what was growing on that tree? Or what? Well, I won't give you any more hints because I think it just came to you. Envelope, of course. Tree reminds you of envelope. Think of envelope. What does that remind you of? Yeah, did you think about it? Because now I can give you a hint. What were you wearing envelopes instead of? Well, you were wearing them on your ears. Envelope reminds you of earring, of course. Think of earring. What does that remind you of? What were you wearing also? Another thing instead of earrings. Typewriter, sure, you just said it. Or a gigantic earring was typing. Think of typewriter for a moment. What does that make you think of? Shout it out if you're with a group, please. I want everyone to see that all of you have it right. Yes, sing. A typewriter was singing. Now think of sing and what else was singing. Of course, baseball. And finally, what does baseball make you think of? Yeah, you got it. Salami. Did you amaze yourself? Did you get all or most of them? If you didn't get one or two, don't feel badly. The only reason for that is that you did not make your association ridiculous enough, or you didn't see it clearly in your mind. So if you had trouble with one or two, go back to it and strengthen that association. When I say strengthen, I mean that you make sure the picture is ridiculous and see it clearly in your mind. Do that. You can stop tape while you're doing it. And now try this, will you? I'm going to really amaze you, or you're going to amaze yourself. If I said salami to you, what does that make you think of? We're going backwards now. What were you using the salami instead of? A baseball bat. It reminds you of baseball. Think of baseball. What does that remind you of? Baseball was singing. Yes, sing. Think of sing. What does that remind you of? Typewriter. Think of typewriter. What does that remind you of? You were wearing typewriters instead of earrings. Earring reminds you of what? Shout it out. Envelope. An envelope reminds you of what? Tree. And tree finally reminds you of airplane. You should be duly amazed. Not only amazed, that's okay. You can show off with this. We just did it with 8 items. If you could do it with 8, you could do it with 18. If you could do it with 18, you could do it with 28. And if you could do it with 28, you could do it with 58. You're only limited by time. Obviously, it'll take you longer to remember 58 items than it would to remember 8 items. But that would be so in any case, whether you're applying the link system of memory or not. And this is called the link system of memory. Why? For want of a better name. I made that up because what you're doing here is you're linking the present to the preceding, forming a chain, but you are linking the items. So I call it the link system of memory. I've called it that for so many years that has become the word for it. That's what people use. My imitators, I'm flattered, use it. That's the word I made up for it, okay? So as I say, if you can do it with 8, you can do it with 108, and you can do it forward and backward. Now, ordinarily, you don't have to remember items backward. I just showed you how strong your memory can be. Look, when you make a silly association between 2 items, you are pinpointing your concentration in a way that you never could before. You never have in your entire life. You are grabbing your mind by the scruff of the neck and you're telling it, darn it, pay attention. That's what you're doing. That's what my systems force you to do. Focus your attention in a way you never, ever dreamed possible. You can do that in any area of memory or learning. Your children can do it. You can do it socially. You can do it in business. I will talk some more about the link system when you turn me over. Why don't you fast forward, turn me over, and we'll continue this discussion on the other side of the tape. Sure, I could teach you any area of memory first, but I teach the link system first for a very important reason. The reason is that the link system, that concept encompasses all the ideas that are applied to all the memory systems. There are 2 main areas that I'd like to talk about: the reminder principle and the slap in the face principle. You have applied both of them as you did the link system of memory, as you applied the link system of memory. I'll talk about those for a moment, and then we'll touch on a few other points. The reminder principle is something all of us have done all our lives or have used all our lives. All my systems, you see, are based on natural phenomena. As I told you, there's nothing Twilight Zone-y or strange or weird or eerie about them at all. The reminder principle is simply this. All our lives we see something and it makes us mentally say, oops, that reminds me. And usually the thing that made you say that had nothing to do with the thing it reminded you of. Of course, in the back of your mind there was a connection. There's that word connection or association again. The problem is that that's a subconscious mental calisthenic. You have no control over it. In other words, if you made a strong association consciously, if you made a strong association without knowing it, without realizing it, then you will have remembered. If you didn't make a strong association, then you will have forgotten. Okay, if I can teach you to make those associations knowingly, consciously, then you will have a trained memory, and I can. That's exactly what I'm going to teach you. I already have. So I use the reminder principle. All memory is based on that. One thing reminds you of another. Not only is all memory based on that, all knowledge is based on that. Memory and knowledge go hand in hand. You cannot tear those 2 magnets apart. Memory is knowledge. Okay, the slap in the face principle. You know that Aristotle wrote 2 books. If I'm going to drop names, I'm going to drop good ones. Aristotle wrote 2 books on the subject of memory. The first sentence in one of those books is, in order to think, we must speculate with images. Now, he wrote that 2,500 years ago, and he knew that in order to think, we must see pictures in our mind's eye. That's what I'm teaching you to do. But there's another point here. Aristotle, Socrates, Simonides, Plato, they were all philosophers, but they were also teachers. And they each taught head to head. They would teach one person at a time. When Aristotle was teaching one student and he made what he thought was an important point, do you know what he did? He slapped the student in the face very hard. The idea being that the student would never forget that point. That's why I call this the slap in the face principle. You see, it does work. There's only one problem with it. It hurts. I don't want you to walk around slapping yourself in the face. The ridiculous or impossible pictures accomplish that for you. That is the mental slap in the face, and that's why I call it the slap in the face principle. Look, if you drove by the most beautiful meadow in the world, and somebody stopped you a mile down the road and said, "Did you see that gorgeous meadow?" you wouldn't know what they were talking about. You never would have noticed it. But if you drove by that meadow and there was a naked man running for his life while a wild, snorting bull was chasing him, and if it just you saw that for a split second, you would never forget that silly, ridiculous, and violent picture. That's the whole point. That's the slap in the face principle. So I am using those concepts within the link, and those concepts are used throughout the mind and memory power course. You see, because they make memory easy. They make it easy to remember, and therefore they make it easy and easier to learn. Those two principles are integral to my systems. The reminder principle, the slap in the face principle. Now, what you've done when you did the link, I told you before, and it warrants repetition. You will find some repetition on these tapes and in the Programmed Learning Memory Power book. And when I repeat, I do it purposely. The things I repeat warrant repetition, as does this point. What you were doing was pinpointing your concentration in a way you never could before. You know, there's something I've said, I've made it a cliche, I've said it for 40 years, and I still say it. Even if my systems don't work, they must work. Now, that's a very contradictory statement. I realize that, but I know exactly what I'm talking about. Because you see, just trying to apply the system must better your memory. And I don't even like the word better. That's too mundane for me. I don't better your memory. I don't just improve your memory. I'll give you a memory you never dreamed possible. But let's, just for want of a better word, I'm saying better your memory. So when you try to apply the systems, you are concentrating in order to apply them in a way you never did before. That in itself must better your memory to, again, a degree you never dreamed possible. So even if the systems don't work, they must work, but they do work beautifully, as you will see, definitely, as we continue. Now, people always have questions about the link system when we do it at first. One of the questions is, what about retentiveness? How long can I retain a list that I've remembered or memorized or learned via the link system? The answer is you can retain it for as long as you like. There really isn't a definite answer to this. I'll tell you why. It's use that sets the retentiveness. Meaning, if you've used the link system in order to remember items that you intend to use for some reason, by the third or fourth time you've used that information, it becomes knowledge. You will then retain it for as long as you like as you use it. That's automatic. You have nothing to do with it, really. It's the use that sets retentiveness. But one of the beauties of it is that you don't retain it if you don't want to. For example, you know, one of the things people tell me about is shopping lists, and people say, oh, well, it's not a very important thing, and it's not earth-shattering, and I usually make a list. And, of course, in the next breath, people will say to me, but I forget to take the list with me, or I lose it. Okay, it's not an earth-shattering problem, but it could be aggravating to come back from the supermarket and realize you forgot one item and have to go back for it. Well, you can do your shopping list with what I just taught you. You need eggs, associate eggs to the next thing. Bacon, okay? You can see a gigantic egg frying bacon. Make it ridiculous. You need deodorant. See yourself putting a strip of bacon under each arm instead of deodorant. That's silly. You won't forget it. And that's the way you need oranges. See oranges pouring out of your armpits. You know, make it as silly as you like. Well, you can do that very quickly. You can form a list. But here's my point. You need to remember those items only for as long as it takes you to go to the supermarket, walk up and down the aisles. As you see an item you need, throw it into your shopping cart, and then all you have to do is go over your link mentally. Any item that you have not as yet thrown into your shopping cart will stand out like the proverbial sore thumb. You'll know it, so you simply go and get it. You don't even have to get them in sequence, even though the link is for things in sequence, basically. I'll talk about that a little more in just a moment. Anyway, the point, you don't have to retain that list, because the next day or 2 days later, you may have to go to the supermarket for another list, and you can then make another link and you can do it and it won't matter. The first one will have faded. Your own mind, that computer mind of yours, will make those decisions for you. Okay, I don't want to take too long to talk about one thing as I just did with retentiveness, but I think it's an important point. How can you use this with your schoolwork? Well, you could use it right now if there were concrete, tangible things that you wanted to list. You can apply it immediately. But in most cases, your schoolwork, well, the items you'll want to remember, like, for example, let's say the Bill of Rights. You want to remember the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Well, you will learn how to do that easily. You'll be able to link them. You'll also be able to remember them in and out of order, but that's for a few moments from now. We'll talk about that. But you have to learn a way to make those things visible in your mind. Anything you can visualize is easy to remember. That's why I use things like airplane, tree, envelope, down to salami before, because you can visualize those things. I did select one thing that is not quite as visible, and that is the word sing. I did that purposely to show you that you can visualize an action just as well as you can visualize a noun or a concrete thing, and you did it without any problem. I didn't even say anything about it. I just used that as an example. So you will be able to use this idea in school. Boy, will you be able to use it. It's amazing how much and how well you'll be able to use it. There are 3 important parts of my course, 3 integral parts. One of them is the link system of memory that I've just talked about. The other is called the PEG method of memory. That has to do with numbers. And the third is the idea or the concept that teaches you to visualize anything. That means any abstract or intangible or seemingly meaningless thing. That's called the substitute word system of memory. The reason I mention that now is to strengthen or hit home that point about, yes, you'll be able to do a link with any kind of abstract items once you learn how to make them visible, which of course you will. I guarantee that. I assure you, you'll be able to do that. One of the questions I usually get is it okay to form a story of all the items? My answer is no. Don't try to form a story. Listen, all memory problems break down to entities of 2. And no matter how difficult they seem, no matter how complicated they seem, they always boil down to entities of 2. That's why I teach the link the way I do. You're handling 2 items at a time. You can never handle one at a time, obviously. You can't remember something in limbo or in a vacuum. So there's always 2 things at a time. And the truth of the matter is, if you apply what I taught you, you're kind of forming a story anyway. But if you try to form a story, if you had that in your mind, it would all be a jumble. Don't do it. Do it exactly the way I taught you. Always the proceeding to the present. Proceeding to the present. That's why it's called the link system of memory. Why should I make the pictures ridiculous is a question I get quite often. People say to me, gee, we've been brought up to think logically. You're asking us to think illogically. Yes, that's right. And there are a few reasons for that. One of them is that it helps you train your imagination. It makes you exercise your imagination. It makes you use your imagination, which you may not have been using for 20 years or more. Listen, Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Think about that. Knowledge is obviously very important, but the point he was trying to make was, what good is knowledge if you don't have the imagination to use or apply that knowledge? And I told you before about those wheels that I like to get spinning, and imagination is a very important part of that. It's a very important wheel. I made up a word some time ago. It's imaginuity. If you use ingenuity and use your imagination, you'll be ahead of the crowd. So I made up a word marriage, a word wedding, imaginuity. But I want to train your imagination. I want you to exercise your imagination. So that's one reason. It takes a little bit of imagination to come up with those silly pictures. Now, I'm going to give you a few fast rules to help you make those silly pictures in a moment. But right now, you can do it. You can do it yourself, and you are using your imagination. Before you know it, it becomes so easy and so simple. You know the truth? Children pick this up immediately. It's the adults that take a little extra time. If I say to a child, picture a piano coming out of your ear, they say, okay. One child I said that to said, and I saw a platypus playing it. They use their imagination. Those wheels are spinning. But the adult says, what do you mean, see a piano coming out my ear? A piano is too big to fit in my ear. Well, who cares? I'm asking you to use your imagination. Okay, the second part of my answer to that is we get back to the slap in the face principle. I gave you the example about the meadow and the wild bull chasing a naked man. The point is this: it is the everyday, ordinary, mundane things that we tend to forget. It is the unusual, the bizarre, the violent, the exceptional that we remember anyway. Why not take advantage of that natural phenomena? I told you, my systems are based on natural phenomena. If you walk into a room and somebody played a trick on you and a bucket of water falls down and soaks you with your brand new dress or your brand new suit, you'll never forget that. But if you walk out of your house or apartment and a few drops of rain hit you, well, by the next day, that's forgotten. That's mundane, that's ordinary, that's everyday. A gigantic bucket of water or a water tank spilling over you and almost drowning you, you'll never forget that because that is unusual, that is ridiculous, that is impossible. It's such a simple, obvious concept, isn't it? Make a picture silly and you'll never forget it. See a book lying next to a pack of cigarettes, you'll forget it in 2 minutes. See yourself smoking a book instead of a cigarette, and how can you forget that? When you think of book, you'll think of cigarette. When you think of cigarette, you'll think of book. That's the concept. Okay, I think I've answered that question. I think I've made the point. Now look, I told you I'd give you a couple of quick rules, and I'll make it very quick. To help you make silly pictures, one rule is out of proportion. That means make the item or items larger than life. When I did the link with you, I used the word gigantic a few times. That's what I was doing. I was forcing you to apply that rule. See the item larger than life. It helps to make it ridiculous. You might also exaggerate the number of items. And a few times during the link, I said to you, see a million. I said to you, see a million envelopes growing on a tree. The million is exaggerating the number of items. When you see millions of something, that helps to make it ridiculous. Another thing to get into your picture is action. Any kind of action. I'm a pacifist. I get violence into my pictures because that to me is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Any kind of violence to me is silly and ridiculous. So when I said to you, see yourself wearing typewriters on your ears, when I saw that picture, I saw those typewriters being so heavy, they ripped my earlobes off. Don't you see? I can't forget that. That's action. Now, you don't have to use violence if you don't want to. I'm just telling you what I do, but get some kind of action in there. If you saw an earring typing, see it actually typing. That's the action. See the movement. Okay? The last rule is substitution. See something instead of something else. I told you that you might see a gigantic tree flying in the air instead of an airplane. Whenever you think instead of, that's substitution. So there are 4 simple rules. Whenever you make a picture, you'll find that you're going to get 1, 2, 3, sometimes all of them into that picture almost automatically. But if at first you think about it a little bit, it will help you make silly pictures. You'll only need these rules for a short time. I think by the time you try another link or two, you won't need them. Anyway, they're out of proportion, which means gigantic. Exaggeration, which means exaggerate the number of items. What else? Action, get violence, or action into your picture, and instead of substitution. All right, that's all you need to know right now. And incidentally, all these rules are in the Programmed Learning book, and there are drills on the link system. I think it's very important for you now to go over those drills. You will find other lists, practice lists for you to do. Why don't you try them? Why don't you stop tape now and try it? If you've just come back and if you've tried those lists and if you've rested your mind and you've done it backwards or forwards, you might even want to stop again and show off for your friends. You can be the hero now. You can show them how well you can remember. I think you've kind of amazed yourself. I think I've locked in the idea. If you want to show off for your friends, give him or her a piece of paper, a pencil, have them call nouns concrete items until you've learned how to handle abstract items, and tell the person helping you to call off the item and write it. The writing is important for 2 reasons. Number 1, you want the person to be able to check you later to see if you're right because he or she doesn't have the great memory you already have, see? And the writing gives you time at first to make your association. That's important. You need a little time at first. After a while, you'll be doing it as quickly as you can hear them. Believe me, that's the truth. My students do it that quickly. Now, when they're finished, take 12, take 15 items, as many as you feel comfortable with, then call them off in order. If you have trouble with one or two, ask for the item, strengthen the association, and then call them off backwards. You'll knock your friend for a loop. They'll think you're a genius. Do it. Try it. Okay, if you want to learn more about the link system, I told you that it's something that's used for sequence. It's a sequential thing. I don't think you can possibly realize at the moment how many things are things in sequence. Look, a long digit number, any long number is a sequence of digits. Telephone numbers are sequences of numbers. If you get one number out of sequence, you're going to get a wrong number. So that's a sequence. Speeches are sequences of thoughts. Sales reports are sequences of thoughts or items or products or style numbers. Recipes, directions, very important. Formulas and equations, they are all sequences. That's another reason why I have taught you the link system at first. Let me make a suggestion. I would suggest that in order to enforce the link system, you go over this section, the link, in the Memory Power Program Learning Guide or book. I'm going to make that suggestion each time I finish teaching you a concept on the audio tapes. That's very important because I can take more time in the programmed learning book. And I think you should take that time. That really will enforce it. That's the whole point here. That is my concept. That's my idea. That's why there's some repetition. I want to teach it to you with my voice so you can hear me. You can do it while you're driving or while you're in bed. But you can enforce it by doing it with the programmed learning book while you're sitting comfortably at a desk or on your couch. I would suggest you stop tape and do that right now. Okay, incidentally, there is much more information in the programmed learning book than there is on the audio tapes. There's no way to avoid that. As I just told you, I can take more time with the book. So don't overlook that. That's very important. And quite frankly, I worked very hard on that program learning course, and it's the ego of a teacher and a writer to want his work appreciated. I think if you go over the Memory Power Program Learning book, you will learn as you never learned before. So use the tapes in conjunction with the Program Learning book, will you? Now, if I told you to take off your jacket or coat and hang it on your bare, flat wall, what would happen to that jacket? It will fall to the floor, of course. But if I told you to put a peg in that wall, I don't care if it was only 1/4 of an inch, now you've got something upon which to hang that jacket or coat, don't you? Of course, you could if you put 20 pegs in the wall, you could hang 20 jackets or coats and they wouldn't fall to the floor. The reason I'm using this analogy, the reason I mention the pegs, is I want to give you some pegs. Not for your wall. No, you can buy those at a hardware store. It's quite easy to do and hammer them into the wall. I want to give you some pegs for your mind. I want to give you some pegs that you will have in your mind for the rest of your life, upon which you can hang any information you want to for the rest of your life. Okay, the way I will give you those pegs is by teaching you what I call the phonetic alphabet. That will lead you into the peg system of memory. By itself, the phonetic alphabet is one of the most amazing and helpful things you will ever learn. So let's talk about that for a moment. Now, don't let the word phonetic scare you. I don't know what it means any more than you do, except that it has to do with sound, okay? It does have to do with sound. That's what phonetic means. I'm going to teach you the phonetic alphabet. There are only 10 symbols in the phonetic alphabet. And I'm very lucky. What I mean is that in our numerical system, there are only 10 digits from 1 to 0. And I'm lucky because it evens up, because in our language, there are only 10 basic consonant sounds. Now, I don't want to get letters from scholars who have studied speech and tell me that there are more than 10. I'm aware of that. I'm talking about the 10 basic sounds. Now, before I go any further, I want you to be aware of the fact that these sounds, the phonetic alphabet, is taught in the programmed learning book, and it's taught very succinctly, very well, with good drills. I'm telling you that by the time you finish that little section, by the time you've answered all the questions, you will know the sounds. There's no question about that. I've tested it with children, with adults, with older people. You can learn it very easily by answering the questions in the program learning guide or book. But this warrants repetition, so I'll go over it, but fairly rapidly, because you can always reinforce by going over the book, as I said. There are only 10 basic consonant sounds. The reason there are only 10 is because the sound that our letter P makes and the sound that our letter B makes, as an example, are really the same. One is softer, one is harder, but they're really the same sounds. They're the same consonant sound. The F, V, and PH sounds are all the same. They make the same consonant sound. There's a very simple rule here. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to try to remember it. But if all your vocal apparatus, your tongue, your teeth, your lips, are in the same position to form more than one sound, then those sounds are all the same phonetic consonant sounds. For example, think of S and Z for a moment. Well, when you form the S sound and when you form the Z sound, your tongue hits the inside of your lower teeth exactly the same way. Therefore, they are the same sounds. Soft C, as in cent or centennial, would fit into that category. The T and D sound are the same. The letter T and the letter D, although they're different letters and they're in different areas of the alphabet, they form the same basic phonetic consonant sound. T, D. One is softer, one is harder. That's all. Okay, there are only 10 of those. What I've done is a very simple thing. I have paired a digit to a sound. Now, I never give you anything that has to do with rote memory. I eliminate rote memory. I don't look for uses for it. So I will give you a little memory aid for each, and if you listen to those, you will know the sounds. For example, the sound for one will always be the sound formed by our letter T. And that's easy to remember because you can form a capital letter T with 2-digit ones. For example, visualize one standing up and the other one lying horizontally on top of the first one. So those 2 ones form a letter T. So that's a simple memory aid. Or think of this, a typewritten letter T has 1 downstroke. Just a silly memory aid that you'll need only at first to help you remember that the sound for 1 will always be the T or D sound. Remember, I told you T and D are the same. I wanted to touch only on the first one, the 1. I just did. We will continue with the rest of the numbers on the next tape.